The night before Thanksgiving, at the age of 55, I finally reached my breaking point. Right there in the kitchen, after more than 5 hours of preparing dinner, I smashed everything, the plates, the cutlery, the works, and declared I was done. I was divorcing Carl. What pushed me over the edge? The massive Thanksgiving feast I'd cooked for the entire family, 16 dishes in total. There was roast turkey, honey-glazed ham, pumpkin pie, truffle mashed potatoes, baked yams, and creamy corn chowder. From sunrise onward, I'd been on my feet, elbows deep in preparations, without a single break, no help at all, and not one person offering to lift a finger. My back ached, stiff and throbbing. Then, as I kneaded pie dough with flour-dusted hands, Carl's mother, Marjorie, shuffled into the kitchen like she owned the place. She grabbed her tea mug and, with complete entitlement, told me to fetch some honey for her warm lemon water. I didn't even look up. "The honey's in the basket under the cabinet," I said, still working the dough. "Just bend down and grab it." I wasn't being harsh. Honestly, after all that work, I sounded surprisingly calm. But she exploded instantly. "You know my back is bad," she snapped. "And you expect me to bend down? Do you have any consideration?" A tight knot twisted in my chest. I muttered under my breath, "Maybe skip the honey then. Wouldn't want you to throw your back out." No sooner had the words left my mouth than she slammed her mug into the sink with a loud crack. Porcelain shards scattered everywhere, and something inside me shattered along with that cup. She stood there, wearing that sour expression of hers, like the whole world owed her a favor. I was frozen, hands still covered in flour, caught halfway between crouching and standing. Carl and our son Evan rushed in from the living room, finally stirred by the noise. For a brief moment, I thought maybe they'd ask if I was okay. Maybe they'd tell Marjorie to calm down. But I should have known better. Neither of them even glanced at me. Carl stared at the mess in the sink with a scowl, as if I'd committed some crime. "Abigail, what on earth is wrong with you? She's your elderly mother-in-law, and you're making her bend over for something? Have you no heart?" His tone made it sound like I'd spent the whole day doing nothing but lounging around. Behind him, Evan stood clutching his phone. Some influencer's chirpy voice played in the background. He barely looked up as he muttered, "Yeah, Mom, seriously. You were right there. Grandma's not in great shape. Why couldn't you help?" His words chilled me, but what came next cut deeper than anything else. "Do you have to make everything in this house feel like a soap opera? Look at Aunt Linda. She works full-time, takes care of the kids, does the chores, and still manages to look put together and cheerful every single day. You walk around like the world's done you wrong, dressed like you gave up years ago." I stared at him in silence, unable to find any words. I was standing near a slick puddle of chicken juice I hadn't even had time to clean up yet. Evan, still talking, helped Marjorie out of the kitchen, careful not to let her slip. Then, just to add insult to injury, he grabbed my brand new apron and threw it onto the floor, using it as a mat for her to walk on. Before leaving, he cast me one last cold, judgmental glance. And because Carl always had to have the final word, he added, "You really ought to take a good look at yourself. This was supposed to be a happy holiday." "No, look at the mood you've created," I wanted to say. "My sister and her husband will be here any minute. How do you think it's going to look? You sitting here like this?" They stood there in the doorway, looming over me like judges in a courtroom. Meanwhile, I was still crouched on the floor, hands coated in flour, trying to gather up the broken porcelain shards. The sharp edges kept cutting my fingers, one slice after another. I was beyond exhausted, drowning in work and bitterness, and still, not one of them gave me a single moment to catch my breath. For several long minutes, I stared at the cracks between the kitchen tiles, my eyes dry and stinging until tears blurred my vision. My hands were too dirty to wipe them away, so I rubbed my face on the edge of my sleeve. The reflection in the glass cabinet door showed a woman smeared with turkey grease and spices, hair sticking to her cheeks in messy strands. I looked like a ghost chained to the stove for decades. But Carl and Evan didn't see any of that, and even if they had, they wouldn't have cared. All they cared about was that elderly woman who could sit for hours playing bridge, but thought bending down for honey was too much trouble. None of them cared that I'd been up since 4 a.m., roasting pumpkins, chopping vegetables, kneading dough for dessert. No one cared that I hadn't eaten a single bite. While they sat down to enjoy the meal, I stayed back, crouched alone in the corner of the kitchen, surrounded by silence. It wasn't that I wasn't hungry. I just couldn't bear to join them. I remembered once during dinner, I made a little noise sipping my soup. Carl, ever the self-proclaimed former music major, immediately frowned and looked at me like I'd committed some terrible offense. Right there in front of everyone, he said, "That slurping sound is the most grating noise I've ever heard, like nails on a chalkboard." After that, I never ate at the table with them again, but they never seemed to notice. Every morning, the three of them carried on, chatting over breakfast about international politics and art pieces I couldn't care less about. They called themselves educated middle class. Carl used to teach music at a public middle school. Evan, despite never landing steady work, fancied himself a freelance writer. And Marjorie constantly reminded everyone she'd retired from a local performance troupe, acting like she was still the town's cultural treasure. I was just a small-town girl, raised thinking I'd end up working at the local care facility after high school. Steady hours, decent pay, nothing fancy. Then love happened. I got married, and suddenly, my life became a cycle of cooking and laundry for the next 30 years. Over time, I picked up some sewing jobs, quilts and placemats for the neighbors, which brought in a little extra cash, a few $100 here and there on good months. But to them, it was just some trivial pastime, hardly worth a mention. But let me tell you, the job of a housewife was far from easy. Breakfast alone was a juggling act. Carl stuck to his low-carb obsession, grilled chicken breast paired with quinoa. Evan, meanwhile, demanded something hearty, like scrambled eggs swimming in butter with toast on the side. And Marjorie? She insisted on oatmeal cooked until it was nothing but mush. That meant 3 burners blazing simultaneously, 3 trips to the fridge every morning without fail. Often, I was slicing fabric for an order while stirring pots on the stove. Lose track of the clock for even a moment, and something burned. And what did I get for all that? Not one kind word. Just Carl's sneer. "You can't even manage this. What else are you good for besides eating?" Marjorie, on the other hand, would tap away on her cue pad, muttering, "Could you please not look so miserable all the time? It's first thing in the morning, and I already lose my appetite just watching you and Evan." Evan sat there scrolling on his phone, pretending not to hear, like it was totally normal for a mother to be treated like that. Over the years, I absorbed all that cruelty until I started believing it myself. Maybe I really was useless. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Couldn't cook properly. Couldn't clean right. Not smart or capable enough. But eventually, I realized no matter what I did, they'd always find fault. The soup wasn't flavorful enough. The meat came out too dry. Even the way I mopped the floor fell short. Again and again, they treated me like some servant who could never meet their standards. And yet, despite all that, time slipped by, and suddenly I found myself in the last month of another year. That's when it struck me. I'd been running this household for 30 long years. 30 years. I glanced down at my hands, rough and dry from decades of detergent and hot water, and one question kept echoing in my mind. What more could they possibly want from me? By the time everyone finished eating and set down their forks, I finally emerged from my daze. I hurried to clear the plates, hoping to grab at least a bite to keep myself going. But the large pot of water for the barbecue had already started boiling over on the stove. No choice but to set the dishes down and jump right back into cooking. Hours blurred together, and when I finally looked up, the clock on the kitchen wall pointed straight at 3 p.m. My stomach twisted painfully, as if clenched in someone's fists. Cold sweat ran down my spine in waves, and I was nowhere near done. Marjorie's 2 daughters were driving in from out of state with their families for a big Thanksgiving reunion. The moment Marjorie heard, her face lit up like it was Christmas morning. Without hesitation, she announced we'd be having a full 16-course meal, all hand-picked by her naturally. Roast turkey, honey-glazed ham, truffle mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, baked green beans with cheese. The list seemed endless. There was no way I could manage that all by myself. A tight knot formed in my chest as I looked at Carl, thinking maybe I could suggest ordering takeout this year, just something to ease the burden. But the moment our eyes met, his face darkened. In all our 30 years of marriage, Carl hadn't taught me much, but I had learned to read his moods well. the grim, thunderous expressions he threw around like storms. No words were necessary. He wouldn't allow it, so I bit my tongue and nodded. Agreed to take it all on. But I'm no Iron Woman. Pulling off a full holiday feast alone is a nightmare. Just prepping the turkey and that massive ham had my back screaming in protest, and there were still a dozen more dishes left to make. Time slipped away like sand through my fingers. The kitchen was so hot, I could feel my scalp prickling, heart pounding like a trapped animal. And Marjorie? She didn't lift a finger. Worse, she made everything harder. Ask her to get the honey herself, and she'd throw a tantrum, shattering a mug. Carl and Evan weren't any help either. They didn't calm her down. Instead, they turned their frustration on me, as if I was the problem. In that moment, something inside me snapped. No matter whether I served this family for 30 years or 50, they would never be satisfied. I wasn't family to them. I was a failure, a subpar wife who never met their expectations. They could lounge in the living room, laughing and scrolling through their phones, chatting about Thanksgiving plans, utterly detached. Not once did it occur to them that I was back here, sweating, starving, walking on eggshells, desperately trying not to mess anything up. And honestly, I'd had enough. Absolutely enough. In the living room, Marjorie was settled on that worn leather couch, with Carl and Evan flanking her like doting attendants, coaxing her like a fussy toddler. I didn't even need to get close to hear their usual recycled lines. Carl began softly, as if trying not to disturb the peace. "Mom, don't let it get to you. Abigail never had much education. You can't expect her to understand where you're coming from. Half the time, she can barely get a proper sentence out." Evan jumped in immediately, as if to defend himself. "Yeah, Grandma, don't upset yourself. All she knows is how to cook and do laundry. It's not worth the stress. Aunt Linda's coming soon. If you keep fuming, they'll just say you're wrinkling faster from all the tension." Their little act seemed to work. Gradually, Marjorie's expression softened. Naturally, she wasn't finished yet. Marjorie launched into her usual, worn-out tirade she'd been repeating for years. "I told you way back then. Linda would have been a far better choice. And look where you ended up. You just had to pick someone like Abigail. So uncultured, so argumentative. I ask her for help, and she throws a fit." Bravo, Carl. Carl opened his mouth to say something, but I had zero interest in hearing it. I didn't even glance his way. I already knew the drill. Probably a sigh, followed by his favorite line. Marrying her was the worst decision I ever made. He'd said it before, and every time I stayed quiet, he took it as my confession. I said nothing. Turning away, I stormed into the kitchen, slammed the packaged turkey into a basin, ripped off my apron, and marched straight to the bedroom. I locked the door behind me. From beneath the wardrobe, I pulled out 2 battered suitcases I'd had for over a decade. One was already packed with clothes, winter boots, hand cream, and my old flip phone, the last vestige of rebellion in a world ruled by smartphones. At the bottom lay a hidden stash of cash I'd been squirreling away for years, a little over $1,400, slowly saved from quilt orders. I stared at the clothing I'd packed, dull, lifeless shades of gray and black. My mind went blank. I couldn't recall the last time I bought something colorful for myself. Then the memory hit me. Years ago, after an awkward run-in with Linda, we showed up to a neighborhood potluck wearing the same bright purple dress. Mine fit better, no doubt, but Carl was furious. He sulked all evening and snapped at me afterward. "You're in your 40s, for heaven's sake. Don't you think that color is ridiculous? Embarrassing. You really think you can compete with her?" I had just turned 40. Sure, my skin wasn't as radiant as before, but I wasn't too old for florals or bold colors. Still, his next words crushed me. "Stop dressing like you're going to prom." That night, I folded that dress away for good. From then on, my closet became a graveyard of navy, charcoal, and black. God, how foolish I'd been. One last time, I sifted through the wardrobe, checking if I missed anything, then cracked open the bedroom door. They were no longer in the living room, probably upstairs. I didn't care. I wheeled one suitcase to the front door, then went back for the empty one. In the kitchen, I opened the fridge and stuffed the suitcase with whatever I could find. The turkey from that morning, lobster, sausages, mushrooms, fresh vegetables, all bagged and packed tightly. If it was portable, it went in. Leftover juices and salads stayed behind. But I didn't forget the honey. On the fridge's top shelf sat a small jar of wild honey I'd shipped from Maine, part of a set of 5 jars I'd hunted down for weeks. Pure, raw honey. I'd bought them for Carl, hoping the tea would soothe his stomach issues. Turns out, he'd secretly given 3 jars to Linda behind my back. Back then, I still had the energy to fight. I asked why, and he barked, "Everything in this house belongs to me. I give it to whoever I please. Don't like it? Then leave. No one's stopping you." That's when it hit me. This marriage had never really been mine. I was just along for the ride, convenient, replaceable. I'd toyed with leaving for years. But the moment I truly decided was when my sister came to visit. She tried to talk me out of it, told me I was too old to be causing trouble. "You're past halfway through life. Why make waves now? What will people say?" I looked her straight in the eye and said, "I'm not afraid." She switched tactics, mentioned Evan. "He's not even married yet. If you leave now, while assets are divided and all, how's he supposed to find someone? No woman wants to marry into a broken home." Evan was my son. I raised him alone. Even though he'd grown cold and cruel, a mother's heart doesn't just switch off. I hesitated. She sensed it and pushed harder. "Wait a few more years. Once he settles down, you can go your own way. Wouldn't that be easier?" And foolishly, I agreed. I often wonder if those 5 years were wasted. Maybe. But I also know they drained every last drop of hope I had left. Now, I'm done hoping, ready to live for myself. Evan and Marjorie burst through the front door, laughing about something I didn't care to hear. They flopped on the couch like their world revolved around them. Neither glanced my way, nor noticed the 2 fully packed suitcases by my side. They pulled out their phones and dove into social media, treating me like part of the furniture. Carl walked in last, carrying a large foam cooler. He set it on the dining table and finally looked at me. His eyes paused long enough to acknowledge my presence, then slid right back into that familiar air of superiority. He frowned and barked, "Australian crabs just arrived. I want them steamed, every last one. Get moving and stop dragging your feet like usual. They'll be here for dinner soon." So that's what they'd been doing, picking up a delivery. I looked at Carl, and for once, my voice held no submission. It was cold, flat. "That dinner? You won't be having it tonight." Carl blinked, caught off guard, then instinctively raised his voice. "What the hell do you mean? Stop standing there and start cooking." I met his eyes, speaking slow and clear. "This isn't my job. I'm done." He stared like I'd lost my mind. "What did you just say?" I replied, "Your cook quit. If you're hungry, go get your own food." Then I swept a stack of plates off the table. The crash echoed through the entire room, silencing everyone instantly. The foam cooler hit the floor with a heavy thud, spilling seafood in every direction. Crabs scrambled frantically under the rug, and the sharp, unmistakable scent of fish filled the air. Evan and Marjorie gasped together, their eyes wide with shock, as if they were staring at a stranger wearing my face. A shard of glass sliced across Carl's hand, and blood welled up immediately. Clenching his teeth, he bellowed, "Abigail Dawson, have you completely lost your mind? Do you even know what you're doing? If you don't want to live in this house anymore, then get the hell out, right now." I met the twisted fury blazing on his face with a calm, almost icy voice. "You're right. I don't want to live here, not for another second. As soon as the government offices open after the holiday, we're filing for divorce." I didn't wait for a response. Gripping the handles of my suitcases, I headed straight for the door. Behind me, someone shouted. A cup clattered to the floor. At that moment, I knew they finally understood. This wasn't some tantrum or performance. This was real. Evan chased after me, yanking one suitcase from my hand. Blocking the doorway, he glared fiercely. "Mom, what the hell is wrong with you? You're really going to pull this stunt on Thanksgiving? Are you trying to embarrass us in front of the whole neighborhood? Just go back inside and stop making a scene." He stood tall in the fading sunset, the light casting sharp shadows across his face. He looked so much like Carl, same jawline, same eyes, same cold disdain. For the first time, I saw it clearly. I had failed as a mother. I'd raised this boy, but that old saying, "The child takes after the one who raises him," never applied to us. I couldn't even remember when he began to drift away. Was it from the way Carl belittled me in front of him, mocking me for burnt dinners? Or Marjorie's constant refrain that marrying Abigail was the worst decision this family ever made? Or maybe the endless chorus of orders, "Hurry up! Stop dawdling!" Too many moments to count. Over the years, Evan soaked up their contempt like gospel. He no longer saw me as a person, just the lowest-ranking servant in his childhood home. That quiet, bitter disdain had seeped into his bones. I wasn't going back. I wasn't swallowing another insult. I yanked the suitcase from his grip, my voice sharp as a winter gale. "You've always thought I was an embarrassment. Well, congratulations. You never have to be embarrassed by me again. I'm gone." Evan opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but then Marjorie's voice cut through from inside the house. "Let her go. I want to see how someone like her plans to survive in the real world." Her face was lit by the hallway lamp, hollow, angular, her cheekbones sharp like blades. Her lips curled as she spat those words. Something about the way her mouth twitched sent a chill straight down my spine. I'd never thought she looked frightening before, but now, with narrowed eyes and venom dripping from her voice, she filled me with a cold dread I couldn't shake. Evan hesitated, but didn't move. Marjorie snorted behind him. "She's been threatening to leave for years. Always makes a big fuss and then crawls right back. Drama queen, nothing more. Don't waste your breath." And just like that, Evan slowly retreated back inside, his expression blank, indifferent. That's when Carl reappeared, storming through the doorway, blood still dripping from his hand. "Why the hell are you just standing there? Can't you see I'm bleeding? Get back inside and grab the damn first aid kit." The old me would have rushed back instantly, pulled out iodine and gauze, knelt on the floor, and patched him up without a word. But not anymore. I shot him a flat, uninterested glance and stepped out the front door, dragging both suitcases behind me, leaving behind the house I'd lived in for 30 long years. At some point, rain had begun to fall, thin, sharp, and cold. The wind whipped the raindrops against my face like needles, stinging with every gust. I pulled my hood tighter, head bowed, suitcase wheels splashing through puddles and slick piles of wet leaves. The house faded behind me as I reached the main road at the edge of town. Mud splattered up my pant legs, rain mixing with dirt soaking the fabric. Then, smack! Something landed in a puddle ahead, splattering muddy water up my shins. I froze and looked down, heart skipping a beat. It was a framed photo. I knew it instantly, the one picture of Carl and me, taken just 2 months after our marriage certificate was signed. The only formal photo we ever had as husband and wife in 30 years. I'd kept it carefully wrapped in cloth, hidden deep in the back of a drawer. Never displayed it, but I'd sometimes pull it out to remind myself that once, there was something worth remembering. Carl knew I cared about that photo. Whenever our fight spiraled out of control, he'd dig it out and throw it to the floor, a silent threat that always worked. It became Pavlovian. Every time he hurled that frame, I'd fall silent, fall back in line. That photo had become the trigger for my submission. But this time, he played the same cruel trick one time too many. And this time, it didn't work. I stood in the rain, watching the photo soak through, its colors bleeding, the image dissolving until it sank to the bottom of the puddle like a washed-out page from an old diary, illegible, unrecoverable. I didn't flinch. My heart didn't race. Of course, it didn't. Hearts aren't made of stone. Even the strongest armor cracks when hammered long enough. Life isn't supposed to be a battlefield where 2 people keep each other hostage. For 30 years, I rose before dawn and worked until dark to care for that man and his son. And not once did I hear, "Thank you, you've worked so hard." They only noticed if I burned the rice, undersalted the soup, or missed a spot on the floor. Respect? It never existed in that house, truth be told. That photo wasn't even the original anymore. Years ago, Carl had smashed it so hard it fell right into the sink, completely destroyed beyond repair determined. I went to 3 different photo restoration shops around town just to have it fixed. It looked the same, at least on the surface, but it wasn't, not really kind of like our marriage. I'd been piecing it back together for years, clinging to the belief that if I tried hard enough, I could make it whole again. But now, both the photo and the last flicker of hope were gone. I grabbed my suitcase and kept moving forward. The rain picked up, dragging the wheels sluggishly through puddles as my shoes soaked through. But I didn't stop. Carl probably never imagined I'd actually walk away. Inside, he was likely raging, putting on a show for the neighbors. "Fine, you want to leave? Great. First thing after the holiday, we'll sign the divorce papers. Let's see how long you last out there all alone." I bet he was yelling to himself, hoarse and furious. "Abigail Dawson, you'll be crawling back. I won't take you in. Starve on the streets for all I care." I almost laughed. How did I spend 30 years married to a man so temperamental and self-absorbed? His pride mattered more than my pain. His image always took priority over my dignity. He never once paused to ask why I'd reached my breaking point. No, it was always about how he looked because of it. Inside the house, something crashed. Probably another bowl or chair toppled in a tantrum. Maybe they realized by now I'd taken the food with me. Regret was surely settling in. But the funniest part? None of them came after me. They'd rather stay warm and cozy inside, their lights glowing softly, while their unpaid domestic worker faced the cold storm outside. Of course, chasing me would require effort. Through a cracked window, I caught Marjorie's sharp, shrill voice. "Go bring her back. She took the whole damn dinner. What are we supposed to eat? Crackers?" But Carl and Evan, as usual, each waited for the other to make a move. Neither lifted a finger. Outside, the holiday spirit buzzed in full swing. Porch lights blinked on one by one down the block. Music floated softly from a speaker outside the corner store, a cheerful Thanksgiving tune punctuated by the occasional pop of a popcorn machine. The air smelled of cinnamon, firecrackers, and wet leaves. It was the scent of celebration and warmth, but none of it belonged to me. The street was empty except for me and the rain. Everyone else was indoors, gathered around dinner tables, laughing beneath golden lamplight. And I, soaked through and alone, felt like a character written out of the script, cut entirely from the story. Only this time, I didn't want back in. I wasn't playing their part anymore. I walked past the edge of town and turned onto the road leading to the city. It was an old two-lane highway, worn and slick under the cold rain. The sky hung low and heavy, casting everything in a dull gray that pressed down on the earth like a suffocating weight. I stood by the roadside, 2 suitcases at my feet, waiting for any car that might take me far away from this place. Most people would have pulled out their phones by now, called an Uber or hailed a ride. But not me. Carl always said I couldn't do anything right, and honestly, he wasn't entirely wrong. I barely touched Facebook. Instagram was confusing. I'd never watched a single video on TikTok, let alone figured out how to order takeout or book a ride through an app. The phone I held wasn't even originally mine. It was Evan's old model, handed down to me last year after he finally gave up calling me hopeless. I'd drifted so slowly through these years, I barely noticed the world moving on without me. There was a time when just standing on the roadside meant carpool vans would pull over, offering rides without many questions. But now, even waving down a stranger felt like something from a bygone era. I waited and waited. Not a single car passed. A flicker of panic stirred in my chest. Of course, it was Thanksgiving. Most drivers were home carving turkey and sipping wine with their families, not out on the road picking up strangers. But adulthood has no holidays. Somewhere, someone is always working because they have no choice. Maybe my luck wasn't entirely gone. Finally, a yellow cab appeared in the distance, its windshield wipers squeaking back and forth as it cut through the rain. Its headlights glowed softly through the mist, twin orbs of calm lighting the pavement before me. My pulse slowed. The panic melted beneath the steady rhythm of raindrops. I exhaled, relief bubbling up inside. Then the cab door opened, and all that relief vanished. Out stepped Linda Brooks. Linda had been my classmate back in grade school and Carl's college girlfriend. Her mother had forced them apart, insisting Carl was too poor for her daughter. Not long after, Linda was married off out of state to a wealthy building materials magnate, but life hadn't been kind to her either. After having a daughter, She developed health complications, got divorced, and raised the child alone for years. Eventually, fate looped her back to our small town. Her daughter married a local man whose parents died young, leaving a baby with no one to care for. Linda moved in to help. Now that her grandson was in preschool, Linda had resumed city life. She dressed like a high-powered executive, commuting in and out with the assured stride of someone who had never known hardship. Every morning, she'd strut past my house in heels, clicking across the brick sidewalk, calling her rideshare. Every evening, she returned with her handbag swinging, chin held high. She always threw me that look, that smug, glassy glance that said, "See how well I've made it for myself." It was like she was drinking in the sight of me through the kitchen window, my apron smeared, hair pulled back, while she soaked up the daylight. Honestly, I wasn't jealous of her. If anything, I respected parts of her. Raising a child alone takes guts. That kind of strength isn't easy to come by. But what lingered in my mind were her words. The ones that sounded polished but hit like a slap. Every so often, she'd slip into that full-on regretful voice and say things like, "You know, if my mother hadn't interfered back then, you never would have ended up with Carl." That arrogance. She and Carl were cut from the same cloth. Every sentence disguised as small talk but secretly sharp as knives, always aimed at the softest parts of your heart. I knew exactly what she was playing at. It wasn't really about Carl. It wasn't even about me. It was about presence, about reminding me, once again, that she stood taller, that I was still crawling. "Well, well, it really is you, Abigail," she said, stepping right in front of me. Her voice was sugary sweet, dripping with that familiar fake concern. "Towing all those suitcases on Thanksgiving. What's the occasion? Moving out?" I stayed silent. She chuckled softly, like she had some private joke I'd never get. "Don't tell me it's about those jars of honey Carl dropped off the other day." "Oh, Abigail, really? You let that bother you? You're just too sensitive." She continued, voice dripping with condescension. "I mean, you're nothing like me. You don't have a job, no income, no idea how the real world works. You walk out on Carl. What exactly do you plan to live on? Air?" I looked up at her. Her makeup flawless, crimson wool coat cinched perfectly at the waist, a fitted dress beneath, and tall black boots gleaming despite the weather. Her leather handbag swung neatly from her wrist. She looked like one of those powerful women from TV dramas, every click of her heels on the cobblestones echoing like she was too big for this little town. But I knew better. That sharpness wasn't pride from achievement. It was smugness born from never giving up the need to feel superior to me. She stood there in the rain, eyes sliding over me like I was some soggy mess scraped off the sidewalk. Her voice still coated in syrup, artificial and cloying. I stood in my soaked parka, the hood knocked askew by the wind, water dripping from the ends of my hair, but for once, I didn't feel cold. I met her gaze and said, calm and steady like still water, "You're right, I'm not like you." She blinked, caught off guard for a moment. "I'm not the type to play dress-up for the world and scheme behind closed doors. You spend every ounce of your energy looking like a success. But let's not pretend you got where you are by grit alone. After your divorce, your family caught you when you fell. You flashed a few smiles, and someone handed you a job. You walk around town like you're too good to look anyone in the eye." I stepped closer and glanced down at her polished boots before letting out a soft, dry laugh. I'm not built like that. I stayed home all these years and let life wear me down, but I raised my son. I cared for Carl's mother for 3 decades, from scrubbing dishes to fixing leaky faucets, from midnight fevers to grocery runs and snowstorms. I did it all. I might not know how to use your fancy apps or stage an office selfie with the caption "so busy today," but I know how to live a real life. But I built mine with my own hands. She opened her mouth, probably to fire back another slick remark, but I cut her off. "I don't have your polish or your charm, but I know who I am. I know what I can do." I tilted my head. "All you know how to do is look down on people and pretend you're living a life no one else can touch. But deep down, you're still clinging to an image. That's not strength, it's theater." Her fake smile slid away, replaced by a look colder than the wind and rain around us. I didn't care. I turned away, grabbed my suitcase handles, and walked toward the waiting cab. Before climbing in, I glanced back once more and said quietly, You think I won't survive without Carl? But the truth is, this is the first time I've really started to live, and it feels amazing. The car door closed with a soft, final thud. Just like that, I felt like I'd said goodbye to the woman I used to be. City streetlights shimmered like stars caught in the rain, dim, golden, but steady. I gave the driver an address. He glanced at me through the rearview mirror and asked kindly, "Just moved?" I nodded. No words followed. Grace had been my neighbor years ago. She'd told me over fences and front steps not to spend my whole life cooped inside that house. She'd invited me more than once to come work with her, saying I deserved better than a life stuck behind a stove. We hadn't kept close touch, but I knew she was still working at a senior care center, one of those rare, gentle, loyal souls. She lived alone now in a modest 2-bedroom on the city's edge. Her husband had passed young, and both her children moved out of state for work. That spare room had been empty for years. She'd always said, "If the day ever comes that you need to leave, it's yours." No questions asked. I never thought that day would actually come. When she opened the door, apron on and a skeleton key hanging around her neck, she stared at me for 3 seconds, soaking wet suitcase in one hand, rain dripping from my coat, then pulled me inside wordlessly. She handed me a towel and laughed softly. "I knew this day would come. I'm just glad you made it." I smiled despite my stinging nose and burning eyes. That night over dinner, we talked. I told her everything, the years trapped in that house, the exhaustion, the loneliness. She didn't sigh or look away. She just listened. When I finished sharing, she reached across the table and gently squeezed my hand. "You should have left long ago," she said softly, "but I'm glad you finally did. It's never too late to start over." The next morning, she took me to the care facility where she worked. "There's an opening for an assistant caregiver," she told me. "No license required, just some basic training. Mostly companionship and light housekeeping." Half in jest, I said, "Are you sure? I can barely use a smartphone." She brushed it off with a warm smile. "Kindness goes a long way. You're a great cook, you notice people, and you actually listen. That means more than swiping through apps." I nodded, promising to try. I didn't expect much at first, but on my very first day, an elderly lady gripped my hand and refused to let go. She told me I reminded her of her sister, who had passed away decades earlier. In that moment, I realized something I'd never fully seen before. Every bit of patience I'd learned standing in that kitchen, every quiet skill I'd built over 30 years of unnoticed labor, was finally something valuable, something I could depend on, something that belonged to me. After work, back at Grace's cozy home, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years. Inside were patchwork creations I had sewn in fleeting moments between chores, a small collection of quilted purses, fabric aprons, hand-stitched pillows, all made with meticulous care, the kind only visible to those who look closely. Grace's eyes lit up as she picked up a tiny handbag. "Abigail, these are stunning! You've been making these all along and only sold them at local markets? Have you thought about selling online? You'd get way more orders." I gave her a sheepish smile. I never had the time. There was always something at home demanding my attention. She pulled out a chair, sat beside me, and opened her laptop. "Trust me, your work belongs on the internet. Etsy's a paradise for people who create with their hands." I frowned. "Grace, I barely know how to check my bank balance, let alone run an online store." "I'll teach you," she said with a grin, snapping the laptop shut. "First, we create your profile. Then we add photos, write descriptions, set prices, one step at a time." And that's how it began. She patiently guided me through creating an account, uploading pictures, crafting product descriptions, and setting prices. I stumbled through it all, but Grace just laughed. "You're picking this up faster than I did in my early days." That night, I stitched 3 small coin purses, photographed them, and listed them online. The following morning, I woke to a notification from Etsy, my very first order. My heart soared, pounding so fiercely I felt it in my fingertips, quicker than the first time I held Evan in my arms. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the screen, my phone trembling in my hands. Grace called from the kitchen. "Breakfast ready." I wiped my eyes and replied, "On my way." That meal tasted better than anything I'd eaten in years. That night, curled up in Grace's guest room, I opened her old notebook and wrote my first journal entry. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing. Starting today, this life belongs to me. Closing the notebook, I gazed out the window. City lights flickered in the distance, dim, golden, steady. For the first time in decades, I felt grounded, at home. 3 days after I left, I received a call from Carl's sister, Carla. Her voice was strained, awkwardly polite. "Hi, Abigail. How have you been? Things at home?" "Well, it's been a bit chaotic since you left. Thanksgiving dinner was kind of a disaster." I chuckled softly. "Oh, you mean the one where no one wiped the table, the turkey burned, kids were crawling on the floor, and the elders complained about their backs." She hesitated. "So you're really not coming back?" "No," I said firmly but kindly. "I'm not. And if you don't mind, tell your brother it's time he learned to take care of himself." I hung up, feeling neither triumphant nor bitter, just quietly relieved, as if I finally understood. This family couldn't even survive one holiday meal without me. Later, Grace brought me the full story, pieced together from local gossip. Apparently, Thanksgiving at Carl's house was a total mess. Marjorie spent the afternoon complaining in the living room, griping about slippery floors and how the lack of cooking smells ruined her appetite. Carl tried to calm her down, only to discover a single burnt pot of chestnut pumpkin soup bubbling away in the kitchen. Evan stood before it, utterly confused. "Didn't you say you just add water and heat it?" Carl snapped. "How would you know?" Evan shot back. "That was the leftover stock Abigail made last week. You just dumped water in." "Well, she never let me cook," Evan added defensively. Marjorie banged her fist on the armrest. "See? That woman doesn't deserve this." Relatives began arriving, and the tension in the house became almost palpable. No food on the table, smoke thick in the kitchen. An elderly woman yelling in the living room, while father and son bickered like children. Carla lingered awkwardly in the doorway, forcing a weak smile. Did we come at a bad time? Right on cue, Linda appeared, her timing poisonous as ever, carrying 2 boxes of pastries just for Carl. She surveyed the chaos with delighted eyes, but said nothing. Carl sat slumped on the couch, his face stormy and silent. Linda took a seat beside him, her voice soft. "Don't take it too hard. Life goes on, with or without people. If you really need help, I'm in town for a while. I can help you get through this." Of course, by help she meant she moved in. After work, Grace told me everything, peeling off her scarf and kicking off her shoes like she couldn't wait to spill the gossip. Want to guess what Linda's been up to since she moved in? Cleaning isn't one of those things, that's for sure. First thing she did was whisk Marjorie away to a friend's spa for a facial. Then she swapped out all the honey you left in the fridge, replaced it like it never existed. I chuckled quietly while stitching the edges of a fabric pillow. Linda never took a loss quietly. Grace smirked. She's been downright talkative, too. The girls at lunch said she's been going around saying things like, "You're ungrateful, too emotional, and too old to be throwing tantrums." It's all digs, but wrapped in that sweet voice of hers. I looked up at Grace and said, steady and clear, maybe she should try working a shift at the care center, see what it's like for an emotional aging woman to earn her own paycheck. Grace burst out laughing. That night, I sat at Grace's desk, the laptop's pale glow casting shadows around the room. On the screen, 4 bold words caught my eye: legal aid services. My fingers hovered nervously over the mouse, circling tiny, hesitant patterns as I stared at the application form. I started filling in my name, contact details, length of marriage, household situation. I reached the final question. My cursor hovered over the submit button. Then my phone lit up next to me, a message from Evan. "Mom, how long are you planning to drag this out?" I stared at the screen, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned back and clicked submit. Kelsey, the attorney assigned to me, was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed, quick-talking, and laser-focused. She listened carefully as I recounted everything. The decades of unpaid labor, caregiving, cooking, the silence, the sacrifices. When I finished, she said, 30 years of unpaid work, elder care, and full-time child-rearing absolutely qualify as grounds for spousal support and equitable division of assets. We can file for property division and negotiate ongoing living expenses. I nodded slowly. It's not about the money. I need closure, a way to make this real for myself. Kelsey smiled gently. That's exactly what we're here for. Not revenge, but fairness. 3 days after filing the divorce petition, Carl called. His voice was low and taut with anger. Abigail, do you really want to go down this path? Blow everything up? I stayed calm. You blew it up long ago. I just stopped pretending it was intact. He scoffed, bitter and loud. What kind of woman does this to her own family? After all I've done for you? I looked out the window. The morning sun was rising slowly behind the buildings, casting golden light. You didn't do anything to me, Carl. That's the point. You stopped seeing me a long time ago. He was left speechless, breathing hard over the phone before the line went dead. A week later, Evan showed up outside the senior care center where I worked. He wore a rumpled hoodie and that nervous half-smile he always flashed when unsure of what to say. Hey, I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to see you. I brought him inside, sat him in the break room, and poured a glass of warm water. His eyes wandered to the colorful quilted wall hangings and the bright patchwork pillows on the sofa. You made all this? I nodded. He blinked, then said quietly, I thought you only knew how to cook. I smiled faintly. That's what your father always said. Doesn't make it true. He said nothing more, just sat, turning the glass in his hands. The house is a mess, he murmured. Everything kind of fell apart when you left. I remained silent. He stared at the water, then asked, Do you really have to go through with the divorce? I studied his face, the hesitation, fatigue, the faint crack in his certainty. Then I said, Your father doesn't know how to run a washing machine. Tell me, do you think someone like that is worth the rest of my life? His gaze dropped, and he didn't speak again. In that moment, I knew something in him had changed. Not because of what I said, but because he'd finally started living without the woman he'd always taken for granted. Still, his awakening didn't move me. Not anymore. The old me, the one who waited for understanding and hoped for validation, was gone. And I didn't miss her. I never imagined the divorce would move so smoothly. Kelsey was sharp and efficient, while Carl, true to form, dragged his feet. It wasn't that he wasn't worried, he was. But deep down, he didn't believe I could really see it through. In his eyes, I was still the apron-wearing woman with a grocery basket in one hand and a soup ladle in the other. Without him, I'd be like a dry bean in an empty pot. No heat, no sound, no worth. But he was wrong. Once I left that house for good, I realized something I hadn't dared to believe for years. I was never incapable of living a good life. I'd just never been given the chance. One afternoon, I wandered into a small shoe store downtown and took my time browsing. For the first time in 3 decades, I was choosing a pair of shoes for no one but myself. For 30 years, every pair I'd owned was either one of Carl's bargain finds or a hand-me-down from Marjorie. Shoes she claimed were perfectly fine. I smiled politely, thanked them, and wore what I was given. But that week, after selling over 10 handcrafted items at the weekend market, my patchwork purses and decorative pillows doing better than I ever expected, I had money. My money. So, I bought a pair of soft brown leather flats. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, comfortable, well-made and mine. Slipping them on felt like wrapping my tired, calloused feet in a quiet kind of dignity. Standing there, caught in the reflection of the store window, I saw a woman who wasn't settling anymore, someone who wasn't saving for anyone else or just scraping by. I saw a person finally spending money not out of necessity, but for her own sense of worth. And in that moment, I knew I would step into my new life wearing those shoes. Work at the care center was finding its rhythm too. I wasn't just helping with meals or tidying rooms anymore. I had started organizing weekly activities. Tuesday afternoons had become the highlight of the week with quilting classes. Some of the ladies even jostled for the seat closest to me, eager to learn that delicate French edging I did on fabric flowers. I laughed along with them, but inside, my heart ached in a way I hadn't expected. For decades, I'd stitched pillowcases and quilts for Carl and Marjorie, one precise stitch at a time, always meticulous, and never once heard a thank you. But now, these same hands and quiet skills were not just noticed, they were celebrated. They'd become something I could live on, something that promised a future. That night, back at Grace's cozy living room, I sat watching Etsy's notifications ping softly in the glow of the laptop. New views, bookmarks, little signals of possibility. And suddenly, a memory came rushing back. Carl's words from years ago, after I'd burned a pan of rice while making tea for Marjorie. "What else can you even do, Abigail, besides cook?" I looked down at my hands, steady, worn, and finally free, and smiled. Because now, I had my answer. I can use these hands to build a life. I can use these hands to earn my own way. I'm feeding myself with more than just food. Meanwhile, the quiet rebirth in my life stood in sharp contrast to the chaos unfolding back at Carl's. His house had become like an old machine sputtering on its last breaths, jerky, noisy, painfully out of sync. Word around town was that Marjorie's health was declining rapidly, and Carl was struggling to keep up. The house was falling apart. Garbage piled up behind the back door, the washing machine overflowed with damp laundry left for days, and the kitchen sink was full of dirty dishes, soaking in stagnant water that stank. The real burden eventually fell on Evan. Since I left, by default, he became the caretaker. Grocery shopping, pharmacy runs, paying bills, handling insurance forms, and watching over Marjorie, all tasks he'd never had to think about before, suddenly became his new normal. At first, he shrugged it off. "It's just errands," he said. "I'm not a kid." But reality sunk in fast. He couldn't cook. He tried following YouTube tutorials a few times, but ended up burning pans or boiling chicken until it turned into dry, shredded leather. He turned to takeout, but Carl was impossible to please. Too greasy, too bland, too expensive. The father and son bickering started quickly, escalating into vicious spats. They were like two hedgehogs, constantly jabbing at each other with sharp spines. Meals ended in silence, or worse, full-on cold wars. The house grew heavy with a new kind of exhaustion. No yelling anymore, but no laughter either. Just a stale fog of oil, medication, flickering lights, and a TV left on with no one watching. Evan shut himself away in his room, staring blankly at his laptop. He couldn't write, couldn't focus, couldn't bring himself to respond to editors he'd once begged for assignments. The only person he still spoke to was Lily. Lily worked part-time at the town library, smart, steady, reserved. They'd been in middle school together and had been dating almost a year. One night, overwhelmed, he unloaded everything to her, the stress, the mess, the endless demands. But Lily didn't comfort him the way he expected. Instead, she grew quiet, then said softly, "I remember when we were kids. Your mom used to wait for you outside the library after school. She never called or rushed you, just stood quietly and smiled when you came out." She paused, then added, "My mom used to say your mother was the kindest, most gentle woman she'd ever met. She said your mom always helped tidy the book corner while waiting, and did it with such care." Evan frowned. "So what?" Lily didn't flinch. "You keep calling her emotional and incapable, but the woman I saw growing up wasn't like that at all." She tilted her head. "And your dad? I don't remember ever seeing him at your school, not once, not at the library, not even at graduation. Every other kid had both parents there. Your mom sat alone in the back row." Her words struck him like a cold splash of water. He'd never thought of it that way, never paused to consider that maybe his mother had once been poised, dignified, even admired. Maybe the woman he dismissed as weak and passive had simply been worn down by decades of neglect, burden, and dismissal. Lily lowered her eyes and adjusted her scarf. "I'm not blaming you, I just—" She hesitated, then said, "I don't want to see you become like your father. So certain you're right, you destroy yourself by never questioning anything." She didn't break up with him or plead. She just said, "You need to figure out who you want to be." That night, Evan walked home alone, the wind cutting through his hoodie like sharp ice. His hands shoved deep in his pockets, he felt something crumpled and heavy. A wrinkled grocery list. Marjorie's list from that morning. He stopped on the sidewalk beneath a flickering street lamp, and for the first time in years, remembered the little notes I left on the kitchen table before running errands. Low on eggs. Don't forget your dad's stomach medicine. He'd never paid attention then, but now those simple reminders hit him with fresh, startling clarity. The next morning, he called me for the first time since the divorce filing. No yelling, no guilt, no blame. Just a simple sentence. "Mom, I get it now. What you did all those years, it wasn't easy, and you did it really well." I didn't reply. Some words don't need an answer. That sentence wasn't an apology. It was something tougher, something more important. It was the first honest conversation he'd ever had with himself. The first time he truly saw the sacrifices I made. Meanwhile, Carl's life was unraveling, day by day. When the court finally granted the divorce, his face was the color of concrete, dull, cold, and stiff. Kelsey handled everything with clean precision. I made no unreasonable demands. All I asked was for a fair division of assets and the return of a certain joint savings amount that had mysteriously vanished. Carl insisted the money had been spent long ago on shared household expenses. But when I laid out the bank statements and credit card records, something in his face cracked. One by one, the truth was exposed. Monthly charges at a fancy beauty spa under Linda's name. Several Italian coats and designer handbags bought on Carl's secondary credit card. Even an annual membership fee for a boutique winery in another state, where one of Linda's friends ran tastings and retreats, all paid from Carl's accounts. He'd actually believed those were shared household expenses. Linda had told him she was upgrading their home environment and rewarding herself for emotional labor, and he bought every word. But right after the court proceedings, Linda announced she had urgent business out of state. She packed up swiftly, leaving no note, no stray hair in the bathroom. Her departure was seamless, clearly planned long ago. On the way out, she even took the last jar of wild honey I'd left in the fridge. Carl panicked, calling her in fury. "What the hell was I to you?" Linda chuckled, smooth as silk. "You didn't mind when the card got charged, Carl. You called it generosity, said it was voluntary, remember?" "You owe me," he shouted. She laughed again, lighter this time. "Consider it tuition, lesson learned." And then she hung up. Just like that, she was gone, as if she'd never existed. That's when it hit him. In Linda's world, he was never more than a layover, a stop between comfort and opportunity. He thought losing me meant freedom and options. But what he found was someone sharper, someone who knew how to clean out a man without raising her voice. 2 months after the divorce, Carl moved out of the 2-story house we once shared. Marjorie was transferred to a senior care facility on the town's edge. Every so often, she called Carl from there, complaining no one visited or had time to sit with her. But Carl had no energy left to comfort her. He was barely holding himself together, drowning in his own chaos. No one left to lean on, no one left to blame, and certainly no one left to clean up the mess. On my end, life had settled into something steady, quiet, and deeply mine. After Etsy orders started coming in regularly, I took Grace's advice and applied for a small apartment downtown, a 5-minute walk from her place. It wasn't large, just 1 bedroom and a living room, but sunlight flooded the windows in the morning, warm and golden. By the window sat a wooden table I'd salvaged and sanded down myself, now painted soft cream. It had become my little workstation, where I cut fabric, stitched orders, and sometimes just sat with a cup of tea and an open notebook. The curtains were handmade patchwork, sewn from scraps of old clothes I once thought I'd never wear again. The fridge always held a jar or two of my homemade jam, and the couch was dotted with throw pillows I'd sewn in rich amber hues. In the corner sat a small ledger book where I tracked sales, orders, and expenses. It wasn't grand, but it was my kingdom. Grace and I still shared a booth at the weekend craft market. Over time, we found a rhythm, helping each other arrange displays, meeting fellow artisans, and building a steady stream of customers. Some came for the fabric runners, others placed custom bridal gift orders, telling me there was a warmth in my work they couldn't find anywhere else. Some evenings, I'd sit on the small balcony with a cup of red tea, watching the sun dip behind rooftops. I'd listen to a neighbor's dog barking, watch the family across the street eating dinner on their patio, their kids chasing each other around the fountain, laughter echoing softly like bells in the air. Simple, peaceful, free. A life I never thought could belong to me. Evan started dropping by occasionally too, no longer weighed down by guilt, but with a quiet respect that had grown over time. He always texted ahead now. "Is it okay if I stop by?" When he came, he brought small gifts, a box of cookies he baked, or an old art book he found at the library. He didn't call me Mom as a claim anymore. He said it like a title he now respected, someone whose presence had to be earned. He'd sit on the edge of the sofa and ask, "Do you think this essay angle works?" Or, "Have you thought about a holiday theme for your shop?" Sometimes, "I remember you made a patchwork skirt once. Want me to help find the old fabric samples?" We no longer tried to play the roles we'd outgrown. There were no debts to repay, no apologies left to be spoken, just two people who weathered a storm and were now learning to walk side by side again, with mutual respect. One day as he was leaving, he paused at the door and said, "Mom, you look better than ever. I mean it. I'm really happy for you." I just smiled, my heart full with a quiet pride that needed no words. It was enough to see him growing. I had no plans to fall in love again, no desire to be rescued. I had my craft, my work, a steady income, a friend who stood by me when I had nothing, and a son slowly learning to see me for who I truly was. And that was more than enough.